So we spent all this money, significant amounts of money, putting people into Europe. What we weren't as good at is understanding the cycle that was needed and what the differences between those customers and our existing customers were. And that unfortunately led me to have to lay off after 6 months multiple teams that were hired, and that was very painful.
Most founders think that if they build a powerful product operating system, the market will eventually figure out how to use it. They treat product market fit like a milestone they will eventually pass if they just ship enough features. But in my work, I see this product-first obsession actually killing companies. They end up with diluted energy, pursuing 7 different use cases because they are afraid to close a door. Today's guest, Jim Chappell, identifies this as a systematic failure. If your CRM can tell you exactly who your customer is in their own language, you don't have a growth problem. You have a missing operating system. We're going to look at why your CRM is currently blind to product market fit and how to engineer the joint between your product and your customer. Jim, thank you so much for being here. You have scaled companies from $1 million to unicorns and seen the board-level consequences of both discipline-focused and unnatural expansion. For the founders listening, can you introduce yourself through the lens of the scars you have earned when growth stops?
First of all, thanks, Nico, for the opportunity. So I'm a career high technology, enterprise technology, marketing and sales executive. I had the incredible good fortune to grow up in a place called San Jose, California in the 60s, and happened to decide, you know what, this technology is going to be important. Let me walk the fence between technology and business early in my career. And I was able to shape not only my college education around that, but my early work education. So I started out working on operating systems, something called PC-DOS. And then we got into networking and then into mainframe communications. And so I've been part of businesses that have been at the forefront of bringing the internet and computing to life. Local area networks, storage management, then into security and identity management, where my roles have always been marketing, product marketing, and then into sales and senior sales leadership and CEO roles. So the journey happily landed through a few very successful companies and has led me to the enjoyment of spinning multiple plates. As I advanced in my career, I would get approached to do advisory work, and I started accepting that about 25 years ago. And so even in the last 3-4 full-time roles, I always had a board responsibility or advisory responsibilities in addition to being the CRO or being the CEO or whatever function I was doing in my work. And so over the last 20 years, I probably have supported founding teams across 50 or 60 companies, predominantly B2B enterprises, but some of them have been B2C, others had products, but I've been a software-centric entrepreneurial advisor for the last 20 years, in addition to kind of working in companies as well. I do invest in and focus my energies in particular areas. As any entrepreneur knows, what we know best are the best things to invest in. So my activities tend to live around security, infrastructure, data, and of course, today, AI.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that intro.
Absolutely. The journey for founders is challenging when they are working on the how do I get customers side of the equation. Products are pretty easy. So getting customers gets hard. And some of the challenges that typically happen are people will immediately find a few friendlies and say, okay, well, maybe I've got fit. But the reality is that we have to get a repeatable, scalable process. That's what we're trying to build in the customer lifecycle operating system. And that journey, in the way I think about it, requires us to be really focused on how we serve our intended customers. And that focus means, for example, not trying every use case we could possibly address, but narrowing our target markets in the early days to those that we uniquely address, where the pain is the highest. And of course, the customer is eager, not just willing, eager to trade money for solutions.
So, when was the first time you realized that a great product team could still fail because they lacked a customer facing operating system?
It almost crushed one of my most successful companies in the customer management part of the business. There were decisions taken to believe that the users of the product were computer science graduates. And it's rare that the users of any technology product are actually computer science graduates. So that happily was averted, but it pointed out we went through 2 years of just cratering customer churn, and we had to turn around and relearn in the organization what being customer focused needed to look like. And so even in successful companies, that can happen. There are other examples where very small teams tried to do two things, serve one market and then another market, and there's just not enough financial resources usually to be able to go and serve two markets well.
Very good point. And you said that product is easy. I mean, I think it's easier now. I think some of the engineers listening, they're probably thinking, it's not easy. It takes a lot of work. But yeah, with advancement in AI, almost anyone can code, almost anyone can build. But the question is that going to change the market reception on this topic? Because it doesn't really make it easier for the audience to choose a product. It actually makes it harder because there are more options. What do you think about that?
I think that as has occurred over the last 20, 30 years, the customer markets do so much more intelligence gathering and research without ever engaging vendor personnel. And even though we're product companies and we are the vendor personnel, we have to engineer our systems to be in the places where people are doing that research so that we can move past the awareness and into an interest phase where the prospect becomes interested in what we do because we carry on a conversation in a way that makes sense for them. For the product company, for the founding team, the need to focus is so critical because time is the enemy, right? For founding entrepreneurs, we have to use our time super effectively. And this need to do that is why I spend so much energy in the early interactions with teams I advise to get them to be disciplined in developing their ICP, or as I like to call it, IC squared P, because the C squared differentiates the C of customer, which is the company, and the C of contact, which is persona. So we need ideal companies and we need to talk to the ideal contacts in those companies to to be able to go execute our business. And everything we do, from product design, product features, if we're trying to serve one market and one kind of user persona and buyer persona, we need to do that really well before we add new markets. And thus, this need to tighten the focus and really help to make better use of time. Because whether we're bootstrapping or getting early financing or we're later in our financing journey, the expectation to utilize those funds as effectively as possible requires showing progress, and showing progress requires proving that someone cares and the features have to deliver to the people that care.
I agree. And it's not just the time, as you just alluded to, it's all the resources. If you know your IC squared P, then you can basically even optimize your product. You can optimize your marketing. You can optimize the whole company into one direction that actually is going to help you. Now let's talk about these signals, or maybe combination of signal and noise that founders are getting. I often see founders believe that they have signals because people are saying, oh, this is interesting, but they are mistaking the broad interest for product market fit. And you have seen founders with several use cases before they even have hardened the product. Why is this broad applicability usually a false positive signal in the early days?
You alluded to seeing founders with multiple use cases, and I have a specific example in my head where they started with 7, and I'm like, you haven't built your software yet. Who do you need to serve that really cares about this problem? Because to your point, you have to create the software for a class of company, class of individual. And in fact, I think in our 21st century software development world, this is even more problematic because the available markets are getting more and more segmented. So our ability to serve healthcare versus financial services versus other industry segments is so difficult. Why I've seen teams do this typically lands inside of their inability to know, because they've done less than adequate research, figuring out who has the pain that we can address and is willing to pay to alleviate that pain. Most humans like to see new ideas. Oh, that's interesting. Well, wait a minute. Our job is to ask hard questions. Well, is it interesting enough that you'd pay to get it? Well, maybe not. Founders and founding teams have to be willing to ask hard questions and invest their energy into the accounts and the prospects who are most likely to actually part with their capital to solve the problem, rather than just spend some time. One of the signals that I always appreciated as we built early stage companies was, are your meetings with a potential prospect expanding in scope? Is your prospect willing to spend their personal capital to bring this idea to others in their company? That is really good evidence that there's something there. Whether there's just smoke and no flame, who knows? But there's something, because they're investing not just their time, but the time of others in their organization. So the progression from a call with an individual to 2 individuals to 4 individuals, a deeper and deeper engagement, is indication of value. Our job still is, we have to turn that value into a value exchange where our software or our product is exchanged for dollars and cents.
Totally. And not just once, probably, especially in software businesses, it has to be repeatable, right?
Yeah, yeah. The repeatability in our job as software business people is to move from identifying the places where we can bring value and going and bringing our value to them, to building content and market intelligence and putting it into the places where our buyers and users live, to have them find us during their research journey, so that we get that ever beautiful thing called an inbound request or an inbound lead, rather than everything being outbound prospecting.
Totally. Let's talk about CRMs. You mentioned that CRMs rarely contain labels that match how customers actually talk. How does this labeling gap cause founders to misinterpret their own sales data?
Having been at this for quite a long time and touched a lot of different companies, I have yet to enter a company where the CRM has a field called use case defined in the CRM. And not just use case based on what we think is going to happen, but rather in the language that the customer uses to describe the problem. In our identity management company, the customers didn't talk about, oh, authentication. That wasn't the use case they were worried about. They were worried about SOX compliance, right? And so, what business problem are they trying to solve? By not encoding that information into the ICP. So, when I advise early stage customers, my ICP small version is very well defined: geography, industry, size of company, use cases, and the roles or titles that we're targeting. That's it. Those 5 fields need to exist. And the use case one is the join between the product features and the customer interaction. And because that field is largely left out, that join is harder to have be explicitly characterized in the business and in the way that we're executing the business. One other point that I think is useful related to this is ICP, we hope it covers everything, right? It needs to grow. It wants to grow. Our business depends on what our target and ideal customer profile growing is. But few companies actually have in their review process, quarterly review, annual review, whatever it might be, the progression of their ICP. How many customers have we talked to? Which industries did we win in? What size companies are we succeeding in? What use cases are being served best? And when we do a minimal but high quality data capture on those elements in our system of record, we have the ability to then review it and then use that intelligence for driving new marketing campaigns into the future.
Love that. I have a follow on question. Sometimes customers or prospects think that they have a certain problem, but it's actually just a symptom of a different problem. How do you go about that? How do you identify or mark that in the CRM?
In my experience, when that happens, the crux of the question for a given vendor is, are we capable of addressing the full extent of the customer's problem? Or are we really narrowly focused only on a part? And if we learn that this new need that they have is overwhelming the interactions we're having with them related to our solution, then it may require that we step away from the deal, which is always painful. But if we if we can't serve the client today nor in the near future, the cost of a bad customer is way higher than the cost of building something that doesn't serve a big market, right? Any software product company founder knows that they don't want to do bespoke engineering for every use case. And so when new examples of use cases come up from customers, our teams need to be able to react and then plan within the business to decide, is this something we want to address? The client may be willing to fund it, but if they're a market of one, then it may not be a great thing for us to go and do.
And that goes back to focus. So, really good point. Can you give us an example of a company that was busy, lots of activity, lots of pilots, but was actually stalling because they hadn't hardened their ICP?
The most obvious was in an e-commerce company where our Shopify integration meant that we could add customers quickly, but we did not create the depth of integration into customers' financial systems to deliver value to them over time. So we'd get an early access, see some evidence of success. We'd add customers, but then they would churn at a higher rate than what was acceptable. And of course, for a small company, a lot of churn means you're burning through cash and not getting the renewals that you need. That churn then, of course, costs us dearly because we're not achieving the bow wave of revenue that software companies need to create the scalable revenue streams.
Yes, totally. Compounding growth, not just a few signals here and there. So
Right.
now let's talk about the decision that founders need to make and how the derailment is actually happening. Growth stops when a founder hits a fork in the road. They can either double down on a painful niche or keep chasing every inbound lead to keep the activity high. Can you take us to a moment of diluted energy? What are the special internal signals that tell a founder they need to stop extending the product and start hardening the ICP?
What's interesting about that is it takes me back to an experience where our go-to-market felt like it was moving in the right direction, that the signals were accurate across multiple industries. And that led to investment in a European sales organization, right? Because the evidence was good that we were succeeding in that regard and that the product was serving that need. So we spent all this money, significant amounts of money, putting people into Europe. What we weren't as good at is understanding the cycle that was needed and what the differences between those customers and our existing customers were. It may be that the product needed to evolve, but maybe there was sufficient product. What there wasn't was sufficient organizational intelligence about the markets, the market expansion that we were trying to take. And that unfortunately led me to have to lay off after 6 months, multiple teams that were hired. And that was very painful. We had to retrench on what we could invest and where we could invest it. And we had to go really be more successful in North America where we were based rather than pursuing the same international expansion that had been imagined.
Thank you for sharing that. And why do you think this wrong path, adding just one more use case or one more geography, feels safer to a founder than choosing a single focus? Is it something around fear of missing out, or is it a lack of discipline, or something else?
One thing that drives most humans is greed. And so greed, while very good in a lot of circumstances, can be bad if you are pushing too far, too fast for new avenues. One of the ways that I tried to address this in a security company was getting my team to focus. We had a product that could serve the Fortune 200. I wanted clear evidence that we knew how they were solving the problem we believed we could solve. It could have been with a competitor. It could have been that they were doing nothing, or it could have been that we actually were their solution. But until we knew what all 200 squares in that matrix looked like in terms of how are you solving the problem? Do you believe this problem exists for you? So it's a customer interaction and a focused customer interaction rather than, oh, somebody at the Fortune 2000 call, they think we have a solution for them. Whether we do or not remains to be seen. But the sales team could spend an extraordinary amount of time on any given prospect. And you just can't afford that. You have to have high quality pipeline with a close rate that makes sense.
Yes, validation is everything. We can't just make assumptions or hypotheses. In your experience, what usually forces the correction? I mean, if founders are not lucky to have you on their board or as advisory, what happens in this situation? Is it they run out of money or an investor tells them something? What do you see often happening?
Aware founding teams are tasking themselves with thinking like a board or an investor all the time. And one of the things that I always try to do as an advisor is to help the founding teams realize that the communities of interest, their board, their investors, are looking to them to deliver on the same metrics that you would want as a budget holder in your home to be delivering on. You don't want to be, spending ridiculous amounts of money on a budget area that doesn't really serve your family. Well, the same thing exists in a company. And so if the founding executive team can manage itself within that context and know in advance by virtue of, a profit and loss statement, where are the budgets going? Where's the spending going? What's the return on that investment? Then they can try and address it. But typical board meeting deck is, where are the financials? Where's the product? Where's the pipeline? And those people are going to be looking in the exact same way for, wait a minute, why is our marketing expense 3x what we thought it was going to be, or our sales expense or our product expense, and yet we haven't achieved the revenues? And so that will create the pressure in the conversation with those entities to, okay, it's time to pull in spending. It's time to go after more client markets that are more predictable, right? Even if they may not be the glamorous next one that you think you ultimately can serve, it's way better to be closing business consistently as you grow.
Very good point. And I think another important point is self-awareness, because investors, board members, they're all going to listen to the story that the founder tells them. And they're not in the day-to-day trenches to see what's really happening. Have you seen when the founders are telling a different story to everyone and thinking that this is actually helping them, but it's really hurting them?
Yeah, the founding team that isn't focused is that eventually will, except in probably very few cases, break apart. And that need to maintain the focus, turn that focus into daily behavior. One of the things that I rely on is classic time management. We don't achieve long-term goals if we don't set short-term objectives, and those short-term objectives need to turn into monthly, weekly, daily tasks and activities. And so if the founders aren't opening up enough new conversations, aren't having enough interactions in the market, aren't evaluating diligently what their teams are doing. They may get lost in, oh, this sounds good. This feels like a really good place for us to go, but there's no evidence that it is. And so that discipline of daily, weekly kind of cadence of what milestone are we tracking and how are we doing at it is critical, down to the point in many founding teams, the behavior with investors, the behavior metric is until you have 5 new customer meetings every week, you're not doing enough to drive activity. And if you can't secure that, then something is wrong and you need to figure out what is wrong that is going to address that market, or maybe an expansion of market. It may be a feature set. It may be a buyer. It's the founding team's job to go narrow that, to really seek out the best and brightest opportunities.
Thank you. You mentioned before that this pressure to hit on national metrics like T3D2 often pulls founders back into the chaos. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
T3D2, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is a Silicon Valley investor kind of mantra, which says after your first million in revenue, you should triple 3 times and double 2 times, and you'll be at roughly 100 million in revenue within 5 years. And the absolute most successful enterprise software companies of history have achieved that metric. So you get to 1 million. So year 2 should be 3 million, or whether it's year 2, it's the first year after 1 million. And maybe you get to 3 million or you get to 4 million. So then the expectation is to triple again. Well, now you're getting into this dicey difference between 4 and 12 million, as an example, is a pretty big step, because now you need multiple sales teams. You need to scale into multiple geographies. And so that reality depends upon a market being ready for your business. One of the things that my kind of experience has hardened for me is that the investing community is looking at the team, the TAM, and the timing. And so you as a founder have probably convinced your investors, if you have investors, that you've got the team, the market is huge, and it's now is the right time. But if you're not succeeding at driving the 1 to 3 to 10 kind of revenue, then maybe the market isn't quite ready, or you've not identified that market. And the job of the founding team is to be rational in having the right expectations. Yes, we all want high growth. Yes, we want to go pursue that growth, but it's just as easy to burn through all that capital, and then you'll find another team taking your idea into a new place. Whereas if you're practical about it, and if you're mindful of the capital to spend pressure, part of your job is to make sure you're managing that well and you're ahead of it. So the CEO may be going to the board saying, look, we're succeeding, but we're not achieving this rate of growth. We're going to take these actions to manage expenses in a different way. And that is a responsible kind of response, rather than just say, hey, give us more money. We're going to go, burn more cash, because that often leads to bad outcomes.
Very true. Let's talk about customer lifecycle operating system and the challenges with waiting too long to build this. The slow growth, the erosion of founders' credibility, and the eventual burn through all the capital. Can you quantify the cost of this diluted energy? What happens to a 10 million or 20 million fundraise when the customer OS is missing?
One of the things that I try and do with the teams that I advise is to right size that investment as we progress through time. In the early days, a spreadsheet can probably keep track of who we're talking to and so forth. but ultimately that breaks. We can't manage the complexity of these accounts and these users in these accounts and these deals and the leads and the campaigns and all the things that go into what I think of as the customer lifecycle operating system. And broadly speaking, that operating system has to address the going from being anonymous. Every product starts out anonymous to every user on the planet, to loyalty, right? So our job as founders is moving people from anonymity to loyal fans. And that journey is the buying journey and the marketing journey and all of that. So that's kind of the goalpost, the end-to-end view of the customer lifecycle operating system. What do you have to build to serve anonymity to awareness, to education, to evaluation, to transaction, to fulfillment, to support, to renew, to loyalty, right? All of those things in the early days, they're on a founder or maybe parts of two founders. Eventually, we all want to build companies where each one of those functions is a department or multiple departments standalone doing each one of those phases. So what I encourage founders to do is, first of all, realize that you're building that end to end from the very beginning. We don't have to worry about loyalty at the beginning. We don't have any customers. We do have to worry a lot about awareness and education, and maybe we get to do transactions and then we fulfillment and so forth. So designing something sufficient and focusing the energy on the early days of whatever systems we're going to create for the execution of that business process is what I think about when it comes to customer lifecycle operating system and ultimately to a pipeline management system, which when you're on the revenue side of the equation, pipeline management is really the heart and soul of turning leads into revenue and growing the revenue of the company. What often happens is that team marketing, sales, whatever, operations, they'll deploy a large, heavier CRM as they get into the 2, 3, 5 million in revenue and expect all of the people interacting with that system of record to be as dedicated to the data quality as they are as founders. My experience is that is a fallacy. That our job as founders is to realize that the people we're going to hire do not believe that their paychecks get as much value from honoring the data quality and the data hygiene within the systems of record. Thus, takes me right back to, why do I focus on 6 key fields in an ICP? I focus on them because what I've learned is if I mandate high quality on those fields, I can understand at an executive level, talking to the CEO, talking to the board, that here's how we're doing on the key metrics that matter. We're in these geographies, these states, these industries, this size company, et cetera, and we're succeeding. And that obligation at the rep level is a pretty limited, and nowadays with the enrichment systems that exist around lead management and account intelligence, should make having high quality data in those places much easier. But be careful, right? My advice is be careful on CRM going too far too fast and only implement the sets of capabilities that you know your business process is capable of addressing.
Very good point. So rather than policing the employees to make sure they are following the process, you build a system and that system needs to be followed.
The process needs to be followed, and you're not asking for everything on every single transaction, right? You're focused on the meaty parts of the intelligence gathering process, and you're honoring them. And it really serves the sales team well when the marketing organization can take the historical data and turn it into this quarter's campaigns that have higher conversion rates. All of a sudden, the sales organization sees new leads and higher conversion rates. They're going to get very excited, and they're going to be very happy to support the data hygiene requirements that are implied.
And how early founders should build this? If a founder is listening and says, I'll focus as soon as we get 3 more pilots in these different sectors, what is your message to them?
My message is that even in the simplest of Airtables that I built for founding teams, those fields around the 6 ICP elements existed. Yes, I need phone numbers and email addresses, and the sales rep needs that. But, a lot of other information is less important. So I think from the very outset, your spreadsheet, your Airtable, your Monday, whatever the simple system is that you're going to use in your pre-classic CRM days should include that information. And there should be discipline in the company to review that information. As it progresses to a more traditional CRM, Salesforce, Pipedrive, HubSpot, whatever it might be, more information will be needed, but focusing on that narrow set and staying focused on those elements stays critically important. And having the sales team retain discipline around that will enable, in my opinion, a knowledge about how we're succeeding, where we're succeeding, and with whom we're succeeding. We have to be talking to the right people who have the right kind of pain in the right organization, and they desire a change. All entrepreneurial software businesses are agents of change, and we believe our change is the one that our clients need.
Thank you so much, Jim. It was very helpful. Are there any other points that we should discuss that we haven't covered yet?
One thing that a lot of early stage companies think about is, how far do I take founder-led sales versus when do I start filling a sales organization, and what does that look like? So my belief is that, A, you have to be self-aware, right? The extent to which you as a founder are comfortable being told no 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100 times. You have to get used to that. That's the nature of the sales process. It's also a process that depends upon a regular rhythmic follow-up and willingness to follow up and willingness to coordinate things. And so if that's not who you are, maybe you need a sales rep sooner. You need someone to do that execution. And I was very deliberate in saying sales rep sooner, because what I did not advocate a founder do in the early days of its business, or even, as growth has started, is to necessarily hire a CRO or hire a VP of sales until you're ready to make the investment to give them teams of people to go do the day-to-day, hand-to-hand kind of combat with the marketplace, right? Interacting with prospects, interacting with clients, cold calling people, being in the marketplace. So for some founders, they're very comfortable, they're eager and want to do that. Great. I think that's a very healthy model. If that's not who you are, then be willing to hire a sales rep, and maybe more than one sales rep if the market in business services that, whether it's a CEO or other co-founder, stay very close to what those individuals are doing, because the customer lifecycle operating system that they're the main activators on depends upon a reliable, repeatable process. And then eventually, multiple sales reps meeting quota, the market is being responsive, there's justification to go make an additional investment in a sales professional who can take on the pipeline management process. One thing when I think of advice I give founders is, if at the CEO and the founder table, you're thinking about this end-to-end anonymous to loyal workflow, and you're committed to having your company honor that, then when you hire people, you need to be very aware whether you're hiring people who share that end-to-end belief and are capable and committed to delivering against it, or if their expertise is, look, I take people from awareness to close. I don't do the back end. I don't do anonymous to aware. But if you as the founding team are focused on that whole spectrum that the life cycle represents, then as you hire executives and hire people into your company, you can make sure they are either aligned, they may not be aligned, and if they aren't, you know where they.
That was a really good advice. The last part about, not every salesperson is made to do the same thing. That's also very important for founders to understand. And a lot of times we see that founders want to just hire one person to do go-to-market, and then they have put everything within that: sales, marketing, BD, and it just doesn't make sense, as you mentioned.
That's why being mindful of what you're trying to create at the beginning, and then designing for it over time, has become, the mantra that I use and what I've success doing, and have had cases where I've looked back from a successful position to say, well, could we have done better? And some of these things live inside of ways that we could do better, like that first example about a customer success function gone sideways.
Thank you so much, Jim. Jim identified the exact moment growth stopped. It wasn't because the technology failed. It was the missing operating system. Most founders treat the customer journey like a series of ad hoc conversations, while they treat their code like a disciplined architecture. But as Jim showed us, if you don't harden your use cases and label them in your CRM, your energy will always be diluted. In my work, I see founders ignore this because they fear the focus means closing doors. But the cost isn't just the delay, it is the death of your compounding traction. The decision you need to make this week is to stop selling to anyone who listens and start engineering your customer operating system. Identify the IC squared P and stop guessing.